Elena Vale had always believed that broken things deserved a second chance. It was the reason she had chosen art restoration instead of a more glamorous career. And it was the reason she had remained in a profession most people barely noticed. While others admired paintings for their beauty, Elena was fascinated by what time had done to them. Cracks, faded colors, layers of varnish. Tiny changes in texture, those imperfections told stories. Sometimes they revealed how a painting had been altered. Sometimes they exposed something an artist had tried to hide. And sometimes, if she was patient enough, they revealed secrets that had survived for generations. At 31, Elena had built a quiet life around that belief. She worked at the Ashford Restoration House, a respected but relatively small workshop that handled paintings for private collectors, museums, and old European families. The building itself was nothing remarkable. It occupied a renovated stone structure on a narrow street, with tall windows, wooden floors, and rooms that always smelled faintly of solvents, dust, and aged canvas. Elena liked it precisely because nobody important seemed to care about the place. There were no cameras pointed at her desk, no reporters waiting outside, and no wealthy patrons asking her to attend extravagant dinners. Her world was small, but she liked it that way. She lived alone in a modest apartment several blocks from the workshop. Her evenings were usually predictable. She cooked something simple, answered a few messages from colleagues, read restoration journals, and sometimes spent an hour sketching in a notebook before going to bed. She did not seek attention, and she had never imagined herself becoming part of anything larger than her own quiet routine. Elena was not physically intimidating. She had no political influence, no family fortune, and no connections to powerful people. She had never handled a weapon and had never been inside the private clubs where men like Lucian conducted their business. Her advantage was something far less obvious. She noticed things. She noticed when a painting had been cleaned too aggressively. She noticed when a signature had been added decades after the artist's death. She noticed when the direction of a brushstroke contradicted the surrounding layers. Most restorers were trained to preserve what could be seen. Elena had developed the habit of looking for what had been deliberately concealed. That habit was about to change her life. The Ashford portrait arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. It came from a private estate that had recently been transferred between members of the Ashford family. The paperwork described the painting as a late 19th century family portrait of Edmund Ashford, an influential businessman whose descendants had spent generations collecting art. The portrait itself was large, almost 6 feet tall, and depicted Edmund sitting beside an ornate window. He wore a dark formal coat, one hand resting on the arm of a carved wooden chair. His expression stern and distant. There was nothing immediately remarkable about it. The canvas had suffered from years of poor storage. The surface was covered with yellowed varnish. Several areas had darkened, and a long crack ran from the lower edge toward the center. Elena was assigned the restoration because the damage was considered complicated but routine. She expected to spend several weeks on it. She did not expect to find anything beneath the paint. The first detail that caught her attention was Edmund Ashford's right hand. His fingers were resting on the arm of the chair, but the position looked unnatural. Elena stared at the hand for nearly a minute. It was the kind of detail another restorer might dismiss as an artist's mistake. Yet the rest of the painting was too precise. The fingers were not poorly painted. They were deliberately arranged. She photographed the section and enlarged it on her monitor. There was a faint discoloration beneath the varnish. Elena leaned closer. She cleaned a small area with extreme caution. Beneath the surface appeared a thin line of darker pigment. It ran from the man's little finger toward the edge of the chair. It was not part of the original composition. Elena stopped working. For the next several hours, she examined the area from different angles. She compared the pigment with samples from the rest of the portrait. The material was older than the top layer, but newer than the original paint. Someone had painted over something. Someone had wanted it hidden. Her curiosity took over. That evening, long after the other employees had gone home. Elena remained in the restoration room. She lowered the lights and used a specialized lamp to examine the surface. Slowly, shapes began to emerge beneath the visible image. A symbol. Then another. Then several more. They were arranged in a pattern that looked almost meaningless at first. But Elena recognized repetition. 3 marks appeared near the chair. 2 more were hidden beneath a fold in the man's coat. A final symbol was concealed near the lower frame. She copied each one into her notebook. The symbols were not decorative. They were a code. Elena spent the next 2 nights researching old Ashford records. She found references to business agreements, political donations, shipping companies, and private meetings that had never been fully explained. But nothing connected the strange symbols to any known Ashford tradition. Then she found a name buried in a scanned document. Moretti. Elena leaned back from the computer. The name was familiar. The Moretti family had accumulated enormous wealth over several decades. Officially through shipping, property development, finance, and private investment. But behind the respectable businesses were rumors that never seemed to disappear. Organized crime, political influence, disappearances, rival families who had suddenly lost everything after crossing the wrong person. Most of those stories had never been proven. Elena had never cared about them. Until now. She returned to the portrait and examined the hidden symbols again. This time, she arranged them beside the information she had discovered in the archives. The pattern began to make sense. There were dates, location, initials, and one phrase that appeared repeatedly: transfer before midnight. Elena's heart began to beat faster. This was not an artist's secret. It was a record of something that had happened decades earlier. She photographed everything and stored the images in a private folder on her computer. She planned to tell her supervisor the next morning. She would explain what she had found and let the experts decide what it meant. But when Elena arrived at work, the folder was gone. She checked the backup. Nothing. She checked the recycling folder. Nothing. She checked the server. The files had never existed. Elena stared at the screen. For several seconds, she could not move. She had not told anyone about the photographs. Only she knew what she had discovered. Unless someone had been watching her. She slowly turned toward the restoration room. The Ashford portrait was still there, but something had changed. The small section she had cleaned the night before had been covered again. Not professionally. Carelessly. Someone had applied fresh varnish over the exposed symbols. Elena touched the surface with a gloved finger. Her stomach tightened. Whoever had entered the room had known exactly where she had been working. Before she could process it, the receptionist called her name. A man was asking for her. Elena walked toward the front office and stopped when she saw the stranger waiting there. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, with an expression that revealed almost nothing. He did not look nervous or impatient. He simply stood there as though the entire building belonged to him. His eyes moved toward Elena, then toward the corridor leading to the restoration room. He knew where the portrait was. "Elena Vale," he asked. She nodded. "My name is Lucian Moretti." For a moment, the room seemed to become unnaturally quiet. Lucian did not introduce himself as a businessman or representative of the Moretti family. He did not need to. His name was enough. "I understand you're working on an Ashford portrait." "I am. I'd like to see it." "Why?" His eyes settled on her. "Because some things are better left untouched." Elena studied his face. There was no anger in his voice. That was what frightened her. Angry people could be unpredictable. Lucian Moretti was calm. Too calm. She led him toward the restoration room but stopped before opening the door. "How do you know what I'm working on?" Lucian gave her a faint smile. "Your profession makes people assume you're harmless." Elena did not smile back. "And you don't." "I assume nothing." He entered the room. For the first time, Elena saw something change in him when he looked at the portrait. His expression remained controlled, but his attention sharpened. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "Who told you?" Elena asked. Lucian did not answer. "Who told you I found something?" Still nothing. She stepped closer. "If you know about the symbols, Then you already know I found them. Lucian looked at her. Then you know enough to understand that continuing this investigation is dangerous. Elena folded her arms. I'm a restorer. Mr. Moretti. I don't investigate people. You investigated the painting. That's my job. No, he said quietly. Your job was to repair it. The distinction made Elena uncomfortable. Lucian walked closer to the portrait. There are things in that painting that were never meant to be found. Then why were they there? He looked at her. Because someone wanted them to survive. Elena's curiosity sharpened. Who? Lucian's expression hardened. That's the question that will get you killed. He turned toward the door. Elena stopped him. Wait. He looked back. If the Morettis are involved, why should I believe anything you say? You shouldn't. That answer surprised her. Lucian continued. Believe what you can prove. Then he left. Elena stood alone in the restoration room. She should have stopped. Any sensible person would have stopped. Instead, she went back to the portrait. Lucian's warning had confirmed one thing. The hidden information mattered, but it had also created another question. If Lucian wanted the secret buried, why had he warned her instead of simply taking the painting? Elena examined the frame. The wood had been replaced at some point. She tapped along the back, listening carefully to the sound. Solid. Solid. Hollow. She froze. There was a hidden compartment. Elena carefully removed the rear panel. Inside was a narrow envelope sealed against the wood. Her hands trembled as she opened it. There was no money, no photograph, no letter explaining the entire mystery. Only a single sheet of paper. 4 words had been written across it. Trust no Moretti. Elena read the sentence again. Then she noticed something else. A date. It matched one of the dates hidden beneath the portrait. The date of a meeting between the Ashfords and the Morettis nearly 30 years earlier. Below it was a second line. One of them betrayed us. Elena felt a chill move through her. She finally understood why the evidence had been hidden. Someone had not been trying to protect a secret. Someone had been preserving evidence of a betrayal. She photographed the paper and slipped it into her bag. Then every light in the building went out. Elena froze. The emergency lights flickered on several seconds later. The restoration house was silent. Too silent. She heard something from the corridor. A footstep. Then another. Someone was inside. Elena reached for her phone. No signal. She moved toward the door and looked through the narrow glass panel. A shadow passed across the hallway. She stepped back. Another sound came from the opposite side of the room. Someone had entered through the rear entrance. She was trapped between them. For one brief moment, fear overwhelmed her. Then her training took over. Elena knew this building better than anyone. She knew the storage rooms, the service corridors, the blind spots in the security cameras. She knew an old staircase behind the archival shelves that led to a side exit. She grabbed the envelope, switched off the emergency light in her room, and moved silently. The door opened behind her. A man stepped inside. Elena did not wait to see his face. She slipped through the archive room, moved between shelves, and reached the hidden staircase. Her hands shook as she descended, but she forced herself to remain quiet. She reached the side exit and pushed it open. Cold rain hit her face. She ran. Not far. Just far enough. Across the street. A black vehicle was parked with its engine running. Another waited at the end of the block. Elena stopped beneath an awning. They were waiting for her. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She stared at the screen before opening the message. Give us what you found. Her blood ran cold. A second message appeared. We know you have it. Elena looked around the street. Nobody approached. Nobody called her name. Yet she suddenly understood the truth. This was no longer about a painting. Someone knew exactly what she had found. Someone knew exactly who she was. And someone had decided that an ordinary art restorer had become dangerous enough to watch. Elena returned home that night without turning on the lights. She locked the door, closed the curtains, and placed the envelope on her kitchen table. For several minutes, she simply stared at it. She could destroy it. She could hand it over. She could pretend none of this had happened. That would be the safest choice. But Elena had spent her entire career learning that damage did not disappear simply because you covered it. A painted-over crack was still there. A hidden signature was still there. A buried truth remained true, no matter how many layers someone placed over it. She opened her notebook. Then she began copying every symbol she had found. By sunrise, she had connected the Ashford name to the Morettis, identified 3 unexplained transactions, and discovered references to a third party whose identity had been deliberately removed from every surviving document. Someone had betrayed the Morettis. Someone had betrayed the Ashfords. And whatever happened decades ago had been carefully erased from history. Elena thought she had discovered a secret. She was wrong. The secret had been waiting for someone capable of seeing it. And now that someone had found her, Elena had once believed that old paintings carried memories. She had never imagined that they could carry warnings. Since discovering the hidden evidence inside the Ashford portrait, she had begun to see the past differently. Every painting, every financial record, every forgotten letter seemed to contain another piece of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered across decades. What frightened her most was not the existence of the secrets. It was the realization that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure those secrets were never found. Now, in a secured room beneath one of Lucian Moretti's private properties, Elena stood over a table covered with photographs, ledgers, coded letters, maps, and fragments of documents recovered from 3 different family archives. Moretti, Ashford, Belladonna. 3 names that had once seemed unrelated. They were not. Elena picked up a photograph and studied the strange symbol printed faintly on its corner. It looked like a crown formed from 3 interlocking circles around a black diamond. "I've seen this before," she whispered. Lucian looked at the symbol. "Where?" "In the Ashford portrait." She placed the photograph beside several pages she had recovered from an old Ashford archive. The same symbol appeared in the margins of financial records, architectural plans, and private correspondence. It had been hidden in plain sight. Lucian stared at the evidence. "My father had this symbol in his private files." Elena looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know what it meant." That answer only made the mystery deeper. For days, they followed the symbol through records that had survived wars, financial collapses, assassination, and changes in political power. Slowly, a structure began to emerge. Project Crown. At first, Elena believed Crown had been some kind of secret criminal organization. She was wrong. It had begun as an alliance. Generations earlier, the most powerful families had realized that endless conflict was destroying everything they had built. The Morettis controlled the criminal networks. The Ashfords controlled legitimate financial institutions and international business connections. The Belladonnas possessed political influence powerful enough to silence investigations and redirect decisions. Together, they created Crown. The original purpose was simple: balance. The Morettis would prevent violent conflicts between criminal organizations. The Ashfords would maintain the financial channels that kept money moving between legal and illegal operations. The Belladonnas would use political influence to protect the alliance from government interference. No family was supposed to control the others. No individual was supposed to possess enough power to dominate the system. But that principle did not survive. Sebastian Belladonna changed everything. His name appeared repeatedly in the later records, always surrounded by missing pages and altered documents. Elena noticed that the language used to describe Crown changed over time. At first, the documents spoke about cooperation, then security, then leverage, finally, control. Sebastian had discovered that information was more powerful than money. A politician could be destroyed by one secret. A businessman could lose everything because of one hidden transaction. A judge could be manipulated through a buried scandal. A crime family could be forced into obedience by evidence of betrayal. Crown no longer needed weapons to control powerful people. It only needed their secrets. Sebastian began building private files on everyone connected to the alliance. He collected financial crimes, illegal deals, secret relationships, political agreements, murders, disappearances, and betrayals. Each secret became another chain. The system that had been created to prevent war had quietly become a machine capable of controlling the people who ruled the world, and Sebastian wanted to be the man holding the keys. The more Elena uncovered, the more disturbing the mystery surrounding him became. Sebastian Belladonna was supposed to be dead. That was the official story, but there was no body, no confirmed grave, no undeniable record of his death. He had disappeared after an internal conflict within Crown, and every surviving account contradicted the others. Some claimed the Morettis had killed him. Others believed the Ashfords had helped him disappear. A few records suggested Sebastian had staged his own death because he knew the other families were preparing to destroy him. Elena found the first real clue in an old photograph. She almost dropped it. The photograph showed several members of the founding families standing together at a formal gathering decades earlier, and behind them stood a young woman. Elena knew her immediately. Her mother, Isabel. Elena stopped breathing. Lucian noticed her expression. "What is it?" She handed him the photograph. His eyes moved across the image before stopping on Isabel. "She worked with them. I never knew." Lucian turned the photograph over. There was a date written on the back. Then Elena noticed something else. Sebastian Belladonna was standing only a few feet away from Isabel. They were not looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. For the first time, Elena understood that her mother's silence had never been simple secrecy. Isabel had been hiding something. Something connected to Crown. Something dangerous enough to remain buried for decades. The discovery changed the way Elena looked at every document involving her family. It also changed Lucian. He became more protective. Too protective. He increased the guards around Elena. He restricted her movements. He refused to tell her certain information until he was certain it was safe. Elena finally confronted him. "You're hiding things from me. I'm trying to protect you. You're controlling what I know. Because knowing too much can get you killed." She stared at him. "And deciding what I can handle doesn't make you any different from the people we're investigating." The words struck harder than she intended. Lucian said nothing. He had spent his entire life believing that control was necessary for survival. His father had taught him that hesitation could get people killed. His enemies had reinforced that lesson. But Elena was different. She did not want protection at the price of freedom, and Lucian knew she was right. That frightened him more than any enemy ever had, because somewhere between the secrets, the danger, and the nights spent working beside her, his feelings for Elena had become something he could no longer control. He could protect her from armed men. He could protect her from assassins. He could protect her from the families hunting her. But he could not protect himself from loving her, and Elena could see it. That was what made their arguments so complicated. Neither of them wanted to walk away. Neither knew how to trust without fear. While their relationship grew more dangerous, the investigation finally revealed why Lucian's father had died. Elena discovered a hidden financial ledger containing a series of transactions that had never appeared in the official Moretti records. At first, the numbers seemed meaningless. Then she noticed the crown symbol. The transactions were not payments. They were transfers of information. Lucian's father had been buying documents from people inside the Belladonna network. He had discovered what Sebastian was doing, and he had tried to stop him. The evidence suggested that Lucian's father had wanted to remove the Moretti family from Crown entirely. He believed the alliance had become corrupted, and that continuing to participate would eventually destroy the Morettis from within. He had planned to expose the system. He never got the chance. Lucian read the final report in silence. "My father didn't die because of a rival family." Elena looked at him. He was trying to leave Crown. Lucian's expression hardened. "They killed him because he knew how it worked." Elena placed another document on the table. There was a second name. Gabriele Vescari. Her father. Lucian looked at her. Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. Her father had been investigating Crown, too. The two men had worked together. Both had discovered that Sebastian was transforming Crown into a system of control. Both had tried to expose him. Both had died before they could finish. For the first time, Elena understood why Isabel had spent years trying to erase every trace of her past. Her parents had not simply been caught in a dangerous world. They had been fighting against it. But there was still one question neither of them could answer. Why had Isabel been connected to Crown? The answer came from a hidden message buried inside an encrypted file. Elena recognized the encryption immediately. It was her mother's method. Her hands trembled as she decoded the final sequence. There was only one sentence. If Crown survives, they will come for my daughter. Elena stared at the screen. Lucian moved closer. What daughter? She slowly turned toward him. Me. Before Lucian could respond, the lights suddenly went out. The room disappeared into darkness. Lucian immediately reached for his weapon. Elena. Stay behind me. She heard movement somewhere beyond the door. Then her phone began to ring. Unknown number. Lucian motioned for her not to answer. She did anyway. A man's voice came through the darkness. You've been looking in the wrong place. Elena Froze. Who are you? You think Project Crown is a network. You think it is a collection of families protecting money, politics, and power. The voice paused. You are still thinking too small. Lucian stepped closer. Identify yourself. The caller ignored him. Your mother understood what Crown really was. Elena's heart began pounding. What did my mother know? A quiet laugh came through the phone. She knew why you were created. Elena went completely still. What did you say? The line went dead. Seconds later, a photograph appeared on her screen. It showed Isabel holding a newborn baby. Elena. On the back was a handwritten message. She is the key. Elena looked at Lucian. He took the phone from her hand and studied the photograph. Neither of them spoke. Then another message appeared. You have spent years searching for Project Crown. Now Crown is searching for you. A second photograph followed. This one showed Isabel standing beside several members of the founding families, and beside her stood a man Elena had never met. Sebastian Belladonna. Alive. Elena's breath caught. Lucian looked at the photograph, his face turning cold. If he's alive, he knows about me. Elena whispered. No. Lucian looked at her. He doesn't just know about you. His eyes returned to the photograph. He's been waiting for you. For years. Elena had believed she had been dragged accidentally into the world of powerful families, hidden crimes, and organized violence. Now she understood the truth. She had never accidentally entered Project Crown. Project Crown had been part of her life before she was even born. The Ashford portrait had not simply revealed a secret, it had revealed the beginning of a trail that someone had deliberately left for her. Her mother had known. Her father had known. Lucian's father had known. And Sebastian Belladonna had known. The question was no longer whether Elena was connected to Crown. The question was why. Why had Isabel hidden her? Why had Sebastian wanted her alive? And why did the most powerful secret system in the world depend on a woman who had spent her entire life believing she was nobody special? Elena looked at Lucian. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that was more powerful than fear. Determination. He reached for her hand. I don't know what they made you part of, he said quietly. But whatever happens next, you choose what happens to you. Elena tightened her fingers around his. That was the difference between Lucian and Crown. Crown demanded obedience. Lucian was finally learning to offer trust. But neither of them knew that somewhere in the darkness, Sebastian Belladonna was watching the same photograph and smiling because Elena had finally found the door. Now all Sebastian had to do was wait for her to open it. Elena had spent most of her life believing that she had simply wandered into a world that was never meant for her. She had thought the danger surrounding Project Crown began the moment she crossed paths with Lucian, Sebastian, and the Viscari family. But as the pieces finally began to connect, she realized something far more unsettling. She had never been an outsider. She had been part of this story from the beginning. The first crack in everything she believed came when Sebastian revealed the truth about her mother, Isabel. Elena had always remembered Isabel as an art restorer, a quiet woman who had taught her to see beauty in damaged things and patiently bring ruined masterpieces back to life. But Isabel's work had hidden another purpose. She had secretly used paintings, restoration patterns, pigment, and seemingly meaningless details to encode information connected to Project Crown. What Elena had once considered her mother's strange obsession with preserving old artwork was actually a sophisticated method of hiding secrets from the people hunting her. Isabel had not merely restored paintings. She had been protecting information powerful enough to threaten an entire criminal empire. Then came the revelation that shattered Elena even more deeply. Isabel was still alive. For years, Elena had mourned her mother as someone lost forever. She had built her entire identity around that absence, believing there was nothing left to find except memories. Now, Sebastian was telling her that Isabel had survived. Hope and fear collided inside Elena. She wanted to believe it immediately. She wanted to find her mother, hear her voice, and demand to know why she had been abandoned. But Lucian saw the danger Elena could not ignore. If Isabel was alive, someone had kept her hidden for years. And if Sebastian had suddenly discovered where she was, that information could be exactly what Project Crown wanted Elena to believe. For the first time, finding her mother was not simply an emotional journey. It could be the bait in a carefully constructed trap. Before Elena could process that revelation, another secret surfaced, one that changed the meaning of her entire existence. Her father was Gabriel Vescari, the son of Adrian Vescari. The name itself carried a history Elena had never known. Gabriel had not been another loyal member of the Vescari dynasty. He had opposed Project Crown from within, and had secretly worked with Vittorio Moretti to gather evidence capable of exposing and destroying the system. Gabriel understood what Adrian had created, and knew that Project Crown was more than a criminal network. It was a mechanism designed to survive its creators, control information, manipulate loyalties, and protect the Vescari legacy long after individual men were gone. Gabriel and Vittorio had come dangerously close to bringing the truth into the light. Sebastian discovered their betrayal before they could finish. Both men were eliminated, and their secrets were buried with them, or so everyone believed. Elena suddenly understood why so many people had been watching her, protecting her, manipulating her, or trying to eliminate her. Her connection to the Vescari family was not coincidence. Her mother's encrypted knowledge was not coincidence either. Even Gabriel's hidden resistance had left something behind. Project Crown contained a final security layer that neither Adrian nor Sebastian could completely unlock. It had been designed around 3 elements that were never meant to exist in one person: Vescari DNA, Isabel's encryption system, and the answer Gabriel had hidden before his death. Elena possessed all 3. The realization left her speechless. She was not merely someone who had discovered Project Crown. She was the missing piece it had been waiting for. For years, Elena had believed that powerful people had dragged her into their war because of circumstances beyond her control. Now she understood that the system itself had been connected to her before she was even born. Her blood gave her access. Her mother's methods gave her the key. Her father's unfinished rebellion gave her the knowledge needed to understand what lay beyond the final lock. Everything she had believed about being an accidental participant collapsed in a single moment. Yet Elena refused to accept the conclusion everyone else seemed ready to draw. If she was the heir to something as dangerous as Project Crown, did that mean she belonged to it? If Gabriel Vescari was her father, did his blood determine her future? If Isabel had spent her life protecting secrets, how did Elena now have to carry them simply because she was born into them? She looked at Lucian, then at Sebastian, and finally at the evidence that had rewritten her entire past. Her voice was quiet, but there was no fear in it. Why should blood decide who I become? No one had an answer, and that was the moment Elena understood the difference between discovering her identity and surrendering to it. She could not change who her parents were, what they had done, or the legacy they had left behind. But she could decide what that legacy meant. Project Crown might have been waiting for her all along. But it had made one mistake. It assumed that possessing the key meant controlling the person who carried it. Elena was no longer running from the truth about her family. She was going to use that truth to destroy the system that had shaped their lives. For the first time since Elena entered the world of Project Crown, she thought she finally understood the truth. Sebastian Belladonna was the villain. Adrian Viscari was the mastermind. She was the unexpected heir. Lucian was the man who had protected her from the people who wanted her dead. It seemed simple. But Project Crown had survived for generations because nothing about it was ever simple. The deeper Elena went into the system, the more she realized that the greatest betrayal had never come from their enemies. It had been waiting inside their own families. When Elena finally used Isabel's encryption to unlock the deepest layer of Crown, she expected to find financial records, political secrets, and evidence connecting powerful families to criminal organizations. Instead, a hidden directory appeared on the screen. Contingency. She hesitated before opening it. Lucian stood behind her. Don't. Elena looked at him. Why? Because people don't hide something this carefully unless they're afraid of what happens when someone finds it. She opened the file anyway. At first, there were only names and dates. Then Elena realized what she was looking at. Journalists, prosecutors, judges, witnesses, lawyers, investigators, ordinary people. Beside many of the names were instructions: surveillance, intimidation, blackmail, discredit, disappear, remove if necessary. Elena's breathing became shallow. One journalist had been followed after publishing an investigation into political corruption. A prosecutor had been threatened after reopening an old case. A witness had vanished after refusing to change her testimony. Another person had been marked for elimination simply because he had accidentally witnessed a meeting between two members of Crown. There were thousands of names, thousands of lives reduced to information. Elena stepped away from the screen. This isn't a system designed to preserve peace. Lucian stared at the files. No. She looked at him. It preserves itself. That was the truth neither of them had understood. Project Crown might once have been created to prevent wars between powerful families, but somewhere along the way, its purpose had changed. Anyone who threatened the system became a threat to be controlled. Anyone who discovered its secrets became an enemy. Anyone who tried to escape its influence was treated as a danger. Crown no longer protected the world from chaos. It protected itself from the world. Elena continued opening files until she found something that made Lucian suddenly freeze. A name appeared on the screen. Caterina Moretti. Status active. Authority level Crown Tier 3. Lucian stared at the screen. No. Elena turned toward him. What is it? He barely managed to speak. My mother. For more than 20 years, Lucian had believed Caterina Moretti was dead. Her disappearance had been one of the tragedies that shaped his childhood. He had believed that she had been killed during the war between the families. He had grown up believing that the people behind Project Crown had taken his mother from him. Now her name was inside the system. Not as a victim. As one of its controllers, Lucian searched the database again, hoping the information was false. It wasn't. Caterina was alive, and she had secretly controlled part of Project Crown for years. 3 days later, Elena and Lucian found her. Caterina was waiting for them in an isolated estate far from the city. There were no obvious guards. No dramatic display of power. She simply sat beside the fireplace as though she had been expecting them. Lucian stopped when he saw her. For a moment, he was no longer the feared Moretti heir. He was simply a son looking at the mother he had mourned for half his life. You're dead, he whispered. Caterina's eyes filled with sadness. I had to be. You let me believe you were dead. I was trying to keep you alive. Lucian's expression hardened. You became part of Crown. I became part of the only thing powerful enough to protect you. Her explanation was not what Elena expected. Caterina told them that she had entered Crown because she believed she could use its power to keep Lucian safe. She had seen what happened when the families fought without limits. She had watched murders lead to revenge. Revenge lead to war. And war create more innocent victims. At first, Crown had seemed like a necessary evil. It stopped assassinations before they happened. It prevented criminal families from destroying one another. It forced dangerous men to negotiate instead of fight. Caterina had believed that if someone had to control such a system, It should be someone who understood its dangers. But slowly, she had become part of it. She had begun making decisions for the sake of stability, then for the sake of protection, then simply because she believed she knew what was best. Elena listened carefully. Did you know about my father? Yes. Did you know Gabriel was trying to destroy Crown? Yes. Did you know Isabel was hiding the encryption? Katerina paused. Yes. Lucian stared at her. And you did nothing. Katerina looked at him. I chose you. Those 3 words hurt more than any confession. Lucian had spent 20 years believing his mother had died because of the people who controlled Crown. Now he discovered that she had survived by becoming one of them. He wanted to hate her. But that was the problem. Her reasons were not completely wrong. That made her betrayal worse. Katerina turned to Elena. You have the ability to unlock Crown. You have the Vescari bloodline. Isabel's encryption. And Gabriel's knowledge. The system recognizes you. Lucian has the influence and strength to control the people who operate it. Elena understood where this was going. No. You haven't heard the offer. I already know. Katerina continued anyway. Take control of Project Crown together. Silence filled the room. You could change it. Katerina said. Remove the corrupt families. Destroy the contingency orders. Stop the assassinations. Prevent wars before they begin. You could use the information to protect people instead of destroying them. Elena looked at Lucian. Katerina's argument was dangerously convincing. If they destroyed Crown, what would replace it? The criminal families would not suddenly become peaceful. Old enemies would settle old scores. Governments might collapse under the weight of secrets. Thousands of people could die in the chaos. But if Elena and Lucian controlled Crown, they could prevent that. They could know who was planning an attack before it happened. They could stop wars before they began. They could protect innocent people. For the first time, Elena understood why powerful people had always convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. Power was easiest to accept when it came disguised as responsibility. Katerina looked at her. You could save more lives than you could ever save by destroying the system. Elena said nothing. She imagined herself sitting where Adrian had once sat. She imagined Lucian beside her. They would have every secret in the world, every political weakness, every criminal alliance, every hidden betrayal, every name, every vulnerability. They could protect people, but they would also possess the power to decide who deserved protection, and that was the moment Elena understood the trap. Adrian had probably believed he was protecting his family. Sebastian had claimed he was preserving order. Katerina claimed she was protecting Lucian. Everyone who controlled Crown had found a reason to justify control. Everyone believed their intentions made them different. But the system did not care about intentions. It rewarded secrecy. It rewarded fear. It rewarded those willing to decide other people's futures. Lucian finally spoke. Everyone who controlled Crown justified control by calling it protection. Katerina looked at him. You don't understand what will happen if you destroy it. I understand exactly what will happen. You could keep Elena safe. I don't need Crown to protect her. You could stop wars. Or we could become the reason people are afraid to start one. Katerina's voice became softer. You're willing to risk thousands of lives just to prove you're different. Lucian looked at his mother for a long moment. No. He glanced at Elena. I'm refusing to become someone who decides that thousands of lives are acceptable sacrifices. Elena felt something inside her settle. She returned to the computer. Katerina watched her. What are you doing? Opening everything. Katerina's expression changed. You can't. Elena began transferring the files, first to investigators, then to journalists, then to lawyers representing victims, then to prosecutors, independent organizations, and families whose loved ones had disappeared. Katerina stepped forward. Stop. Elena didn't. You don't understand what you're releasing. I understand. You'll create chaos. Maybe. You'll put people in danger. Some already are. You'll destroy everything. Elena looked at her. No. I'm destroying the part that made Crown powerful. Katerina stared at her. What part? The belief that one person can own the truth. The transfer continued. financial records, political agreements, surveillance reports, blackmail files, evidence of manipulated investigations, orders against witnesses, names of people who had disappeared, names of people who had been protected, names of people who had been sacrificed. For decades, Project Crown had survived because information was concentrated in the hands of a few powerful families. Elena broke that advantage. She distributed the evidence across thousands of independent hands. Once journalists had it, one newspaper could not bury it. Once prosecutors had it, one corrupt official could not erase it. Once lawyers had it, victims could fight back. Once investigators had it, evidence could no longer disappear simply because one powerful family demanded it. The truth became too widespread to control. Across the city, phones began ringing. Newsrooms went into emergency meetings. Lawyers contacted witnesses. Prosecutors reopened old investigations. Families who had spent years wondering what happened to their loved ones finally received answers. The world began to see what Project Crown had truly been. Not a secret alliance preserving peace. A machine that had survived by deciding who could speak, who could remain silent, and who could disappear. Katerina watched the system she had protected for decades collapse in real time. "You don't know what you've done," she whispered. Elena looked at her. "Yes, I do." Lucian stood beside her. For a moment, the two of them understood what they had just chosen. They had been offered everything: power, protection, influence, the ability to control the families that had controlled them. They could have taken Project Crown and rewritten its rules. They could have become rulers of the hidden world. Instead, they had chosen uncertainty. They had chosen freedom. And freedom was far more dangerous than control because it came without guarantees. Katerina looked at Lucian. "You could have saved everyone." Lucian shook his head. "No." He glanced at the thousands of files spreading across the world. "I could have controlled everyone." The distinction was simple, but it changed everything. Elena finally understood the truth about her inheritance. She was not the heir to Project Crown. She was the heir to the responsibility of ending it. Her Vescari blood had opened the system. Her mother's encryption had revealed its secrets. Her father's unfinished rebellion had shown her why it had to be destroyed. But none of them had the right to decide who Elena would become. Not Adrian. Not Sebastian. Not Katerina. Not even Gabriel. And certainly not her blood. She looked at Lucian. "What happens now?" He looked at the collapsing system on the screen. "Now we find out what the world looks like without Crown." Elena nodded. The screen finally went dark. For decades, Project Crown had survived because its creators believed that whoever possessed the truth possessed the power. Elena had proved them wrong. The moment the truth belonged to everyone, Crown belonged to no one. But as the first consequences began spreading across the city, Elena knew the victory was not complete. They had destroyed the system. They had not destroyed the people who had depended on it. The families would fight back. The criminals would retaliate. The people whose secrets had been exposed would seek revenge. And somewhere in the chaos, Sebastian was still out there. The final war had not ended. It had only changed. This time, Elena and Lucian would not fight for control of the hidden world. They would fight to make sure no one ever controlled it again. For the first time since she had entered the dangerous world of Project Crown, Elena stood before the system without fear. The secrets were no longer hidden from her. She knew who her parents were, why her mother had protected the encryption, why her father had tried to destroy Crown, and why the system had been waiting for someone with her bloodline to unlock its final layer. She had spent so long believing that other people had dragged her into this world that she had never considered the possibility that the real battle was not about discovering where she belonged. It was about deciding whether she wanted to belong to it at all. Project Crown was open before her. Its power was within her reach, and that left Elena with three choices. She could destroy it, she could control it, or she could expose it. The first choice was tempting because destruction seemed like justice. The second was tempting because control offered something even more powerful: certainty. If Elena became the person who controlled Crown, she could decide which families deserved to fall, which criminals should be stopped, which politicians could be trusted, and which threats needed to be eliminated before innocent people were hurt. She could use the system for good. At least, that was what everyone who had ever controlled Crown had told themselves. Adrian Viscari had called it stability. Sebastian Belladonna had called it necessity. Caterina Moretti had called it protection. They had all believed that their intentions were different from those of the people who came before them. They had all convinced themselves that their hands were clean because their reasons were noble. Elena finally understood the danger. The moment she accepted the right to decide what was best for everyone else, she would become part of the same machine she had spent her life trying to escape. She would not be destroying Project Crown. She would simply be wearing it. Then she remembered her mother. Isabel had once been restoring an old portrait with Elena beside her. Elena had been fascinated by the heavy golden frame and had asked why a king in an old painting needed such an enormous crown. Isabel had smiled and answered with words Elena had forgotten for years. The heaviest thing on a king's head isn't the crown. She had touched the damaged canvas gently. It is the people beneath it. At the time, Elena had thought her mother was simply teaching her a lesson about responsibility. Now she understood. A crown was not valuable because it gave someone authority. Its weight came from every life affected by the person wearing it. If Elena took control of Project Crown, every secret she chose to hide would become hers. Every person she sacrificed for the greater good would become her responsibility. Every decision made in the shadows would carry her name. She could become the most powerful person in the hidden world, but she would also become its next prisoner. Elena looked at the system one final time. I won't rule it. Lucian stood behind her. He did not try to convince her otherwise. He had already learned the same lesson. Together, they chose a third path. They would expose Crown so completely that it could never belong to anyone again. Elena began preparing the files. She did not release only the information that made her enemies look guilty. She did not keep the most dangerous secrets for herself. She did not become another gatekeeper deciding what the world was allowed to know. She released the evidence that proved the system existed, the financial records, the political connections, the criminal alliances, the surveillance files, the manipulated investigations, the contingency lists, the names of witnesses who had disappeared, the identities of people who had been threatened into silence, the evidence connecting powerful families to crimes that had remained unsolved for decades. The information was divided and sent to independent investigators, journalists, prosecutors, lawyers, anti-corruption authorities, and organizations representing victims. Copies were placed in different hands in different countries so that no single person could erase everything. Once the information left Elena's control, Project Crown lost the one advantage it had always depended upon: secrecy. For decades, Crown had survived because information remained concentrated in the hands of a few people. A family could destroy one witness. A politician could silence one journalist. A corrupt official could bury one investigation. A criminal organization could threaten one lawyer, but they could not silence thousands of people at once. The truth had become too large. Within hours, the first journalists began publishing. Investigators confirmed that the files matched records they had been unable to explain. Lawyers contacted witnesses whose cases had mysteriously collapsed years earlier. Prosecutors reopened investigations. Banks froze accounts connected to suspicious financial networks. Businesses linked to Crown began losing their protection. Officials who had once seemed untouchable suddenly faced questions they could no longer avoid. And then the victims began speaking. That was when the real collapse started. For years, many victims had believed that their stories would never matter because the people who had hurt them were too powerful. They had been told that no one would believe them. Some had been threatened. Others had watched their evidence disappear. Now they saw their experiences connected to a larger pattern. They were not isolated. They had not imagined what happened. They had been part of a system. Within 48 hours, Project Crown began to fall apart. Not because Elena had defeated every member of the organization, not because Lucian had used violence to take control. The system collapsed because its greatest weapon had been taken away. The truth no longer belonged to the powerful, it belonged to everyone. But victory did not feel simple. Elena knew that exposing Crown would create chaos. Some innocent people would be caught in the aftermath. Some dangerous criminals would retaliate. Some families would attempt to destroy evidence before investigators could reach them. Some people would use the newly released information for revenge. There would be consequences Elena could not control. That frightened her. But she accepted the fear, because controlling the consequences would have meant controlling people again. And Elena had spent too long learning where that road led. Lucian understood it too. For most of his life, he had believed protection meant control. He controlled information because secrets could become weapons. He controlled his territory because enemies could attack at any moment. He controlled the people closest to him because he believed that knowing everything about them was the only way to keep them safe. He had inherited that instinct from his family. The Moretti legacy had taught him that hesitation could cost lives. Power was survival. Fear was useful. Trust was dangerous. But Elena had changed something in him. She had shown him that protection without trust could become another form of imprisonment. His mother, Katerina, had spent decades telling herself that she controlled Crown because she wanted to protect him. She had survived, but she had also become part of the very system she claimed to oppose. Lucian finally understood that love could become dangerous when it was used as an excuse to take away another person's freedom. He did not want to make that mistake with Elena. One evening, after the first wave of investigations had begun, Elena returned to the restoration studio. The room felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. There were brushes on the table. Old paintings waited beneath protective cloth. Small bottles of pigment stood beside damaged frames. The familiar smell of solvents and aged canvas filled the air. For months, Elena had thought that her old life had disappeared forever. Now she realized it had never truly left her. She had simply changed. She placed a damaged painting beneath the studio light. Its surface was covered with cracks. Water had damaged part of the canvas, and years of neglect had darkened the original colors. Before Project Crown, Elena would have looked at the painting and thought only about restoring it to what it had once been. Now she saw something different. Restoration was not about pretending damage had never happened. It was about preserving what remained. It was about understanding the history of the damage, instead of hiding it. It was about giving something broken the chance to exist again without erasing the scars that proved it had survived. Elena gently began cleaning the surface. She thought about Isabel. She thought about Gabriel. She thought about Vittorio. She thought about Lucian's father. She thought about Katerina and all the choices that had brought them to this point. She could not bring the dead back. She could not return the years that had been stolen. She could not erase every wound caused by Project Crown. But she could preserve the truth. Maybe that was what her mother had been trying to teach her all along. Some damage could not be undone, but it did not have to be hidden. The studio door remained closed. Then came a knock. Elena looked up. Lucian was standing outside. He did not enter. He waited. She smiled faintly. "You're knocking now." Lucian gave a small smile. "You're allowed to say no." The words were simple, but Elena understood what they meant. For years, Lucian had entered rooms without asking. He had made decisions without explaining them. He had protected people by deciding what they needed before they had the chance to decide for themselves. Now he was standing outside a door, waiting for permission. Elena opened it. "Come in." Lucian stepped inside. Neither of them needed to say what had changed. That small gesture meant more than any promise. He was learning that loving someone did not give him ownership over their choices. He could protect Elena without controlling her. He could stand beside her without deciding where she should go. And Elena could trust him without surrendering her independence. Their relationship had begun in suspicion. Then it had become necessity. Then trust. Now it was something stronger. Choice. They were together not because their families had arranged it. Not because Project Crown required them to stand beside one another. And not because they needed each other's power. They were together because they chose to be. That distinction mattered. Elena had spent much of her life believing that identity was something inherited. She was Isabel's daughter. Gabriel Vescari's daughter. A descendant of the Vescari bloodline. The person capable of unlocking Project Crown. But now she understood that those facts could explain where she came from without deciding where she would go. Blood could give her a history. It could not give her a destiny. She did not need to become a mafia queen. She did not need to rule a hidden empire. She did not need to become the most powerful woman in the world simply because Project Crown had been designed for her. She could be Elena, an art restorer, a woman who had survived the secrets of two powerful families and chosen not to let those secrets define her. That was enough. Lucian looked at the painting. "You're going back to restoration." Elena nodded. "It's what I know." "You could have had everything." She looked at him. "I did." He seemed confused. Elena touched the damaged canvas. "I still have my life." Lucian understood. Her greatest inheritance was not the Viscari blood. It was not the crown. It was not the power hidden inside her mother's encryption. It was the ability to choose. She had been given the opportunity to become the ruler Project Crown had been waiting for. Instead, she had destroyed the reason a ruler was necessary. That was her victory. Not becoming stronger than Adrian. Not defeating Sebastian through violence. Not replacing Katerina. Not inheriting Lucian's family empire. She had won by refusing to become the next person standing at the top. The world outside would continue changing. Investigations would take months, perhaps years. Trials would expose secrets that had remained buried for generations. Some people would escape justice. Others would finally face it. There would be arguments about whether Elena had done the right thing. Some would say she had released too much information. Others would say she should have destroyed everything. Some would insist that Crown had been necessary to prevent something worse. Elena knew she could not control how history judged her. She could only control the choice she had made. And she knew she would make it again. Because the question had never really been whether she deserved the crown. The question was whether anyone should possess it. The answer was no. Project Crown had been created on the belief that a small group of powerful people could control the world better than the world could control itself. It had survived by turning information into power. It had convinced generations that freedom was too dangerous and that control was necessary. Elena had broken that belief. She had taken the one thing Crown feared most and given it away. The truth. Lucian sat quietly in the studio while Elena continued restoring the painting. For once, neither of them was waiting for an attack. Neither was expecting a hidden message. Neither was preparing for another betrayal. They were simply there. Together, the future was uncertain, but it belonged to them. Elena looked at the restored section of the painting. The original colors were beginning to return beneath the layers of damage. Some cracks remained. She did not try to erase them. They were part of its history. She thought about her own life. She had been damaged by secrets, by betrayal, by violence, by discovering that the people she loved had lived inside a world she never knew existed. But she was not required to pretend none of it had happened. She could carry the scars without becoming defined by them. That was what restoration meant now. Not returning to the past. Moving forward without losing the truth of what had happened. Lucian stood when the evening light began to fade. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back and looked at Elena. "Do you need anything?" She shook her head. "No." He smiled. "Good." He reached the doorway. Then he knocked on the open door. Elena laughed softly. "You're impossible." "Maybe." She looked at him. "Come back tomorrow." His expression softened. "I will." He left. Elena returned to the painting. Outside. The old world was still collapsing. But inside the quiet studio, something new was beginning. Not an empire. Not a dynasty. Not another secret organization. A life. A life built without a crown. Elena finally understood what Isabel had meant all those years ago. The heaviest thing on a king's head was not the crown. It was the people beneath it. And Elena had chosen not to wear it. She had chosen the people instead. She had chosen truth over secrecy. Freedom over inherited power, trust over control, and a future that would belong to no family, no organization, and no hidden system. It would belong to her. And for the first time in her life, Elena was not restoring someone else's masterpiece. She was restoring her own life.